That number is wrong. No one noticed the boy until he spoke. 6 simple words that shook the entire mathematics department of Harvard University. That morning, a biting wind swept in from the Charles River, slipping like a ghost through the ancient stones of Emerson Hall. Sarah Johnson pulled her coat tighter and adjusted her son's scarf, carefully tucking it under his chin. Her hands trembled, more from nerves than the cold. Beside her stood Rowan, 9 years old, small for his age, with dark, curly hair peeking out from under his knit cap. He held his sketchbook to his chest like it was something sacred. It was worn, its spine bent, the pages softened at the edges by countless turns. The colors of crayon and pen bled through in swirls and spirals. Rowan didn't speak. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in years. But his eyes, quiet, unreadable, intense, took in everything. Sarah was a part-time custodian at Harvard. She didn't have a degree, or even a community college diploma. But she had a son who saw the world differently, and no one to watch him that morning. So she had asked, timidly, fearfully, if Rowan could sit in the back of Professor Nathaniel Briggs's 10 a.m. class. "Just one morning," she had said. "He'll be quiet." The graduate assistant had nodded without much care, not even looking up from his clipboard. "Back row only," he muttered. And so here they were, slipping quietly into the very last row of Lecture Hall 204. The room smelled of chalk, old wood, and polished brass. Sunlight filtered in through tall windows, casting stripes across the rows of students already deep in notes and equations. The walls were lined with portraits of past mathematicians, stoic, severe, all men. Sarah helped Rowan into a seat, his tiny form swallowed up by the wide wooden chair. He didn't look at the students. He didn't look at the professor. He opened his sketchbook and began to draw. Professor Briggs, tall and thin, with salt and pepper hair and a navy blazer that hadn't changed since the early 2000s, was deep into a lecture on Fourier analysis and the convergence of alternating series. His voice carried the kind of authority that made students sit straighter, not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. "Now, when we move from discrete to continuous," he was saying, scribbling symbols across the green chalkboard, "the transformation isn't just mechanical, it's conceptual. You must think of the function as an unfolding." Chalk clicked against the board. Equations spread. Symbols swirled. The students followed, some faster than others. The room was warm with thought. Rowan's pencil moved with him. But he wasn't copying. He was drawing something else. Shapes that looked like waves nested inside circles. Recursive loops that bent and turned in rhythmic, almost musical patterns. Sarah watched him from the corner of her eye. She had seen these patterns before, on the backs of napkins, along the kitchen wall where he had once used a marker, even etched faintly into the condensation on the bathroom mirror. They were always changing, but always returning. Briggs reached the final part of the proof, a transformation involving a logarithmic sequence embedded in a fractional decomposition. The room quieted. This was a difficult step, and the board was nearly full. And then Rowan stopped. He froze, not like a child distracted, but like a mechanism locking into place. His pencil hovered above the page. He sat up straighter, eyes fixed on the bottom line of the equation, and then, clearly, softly, but with absolute certainty, he said, "That number is wrong." The words floated into the room like an electric current. A few students turned around. Briggs paused, chalk still in hand. He turned his head, scanning the room. Sarah's heart slammed into her ribs. She reached for Rowan, placing a hand on his knee. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "He didn't mean to." But Rowan wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anyone. His eyes were on the board, and his hand was slowly tracing a pattern into his sketchbook. A correction. A recursive spiral folding over the last symbol. Briggs looked back at the board. He frowned. He stepped closer. He stared at the bottom line, the coefficient before the log term, and slowly, as if against his pride, he erased the number. He did not say a word. He rewrote the equation, corrected, and stepped aside. A few murmurs swept the room. One student, a tall, bespectacled girl in the second row, raised her hand. "Professor," she said, "I think he's right." Briggs didn't look at her. "Yes," he said finally. "It seems there was a minor miscalculation." Sarah could barely breathe. Her hand gripped Rowan's. She didn't know if she wanted to run or cry or shout for joy. He had spoken. Not just any words, but the exact words no one else had dared to say. Rowan turned back to his drawing. The spiral continued. He had already moved on. After class, the room emptied slowly. Some students gave Sarah small nods. One whispered, "That was amazing." Another just smiled. No one asked for Rowan's name. Professor Briggs didn't approach. He erased the board with short, rigid strokes. Outside, Sarah and Rowan stepped into the wind again. She looked down at him. "Rowan," she whispered, "how did you know?" He didn't reply. But his hand reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. On it was a pattern she hadn't seen before. A new spiral, one that branched like roots of a tree. He handed it to her. Then he looked at the sky. And for the first time in a very long time, Rowan smiled. Something had shifted. Not just in the equation, not just in the class, but in him. And maybe, just maybe, in her too. That night, Professor Briggs couldn't sleep. He returned to his office, turned on the light, and rewrote the proof again. He ran the numbers 5 times. It was subtle. The error was deep in the transition from series to integral. It would have passed peer review. It had, but the boy had seen it instantly. "Who is he?" Briggs murmured to himself. Then, more softly, with a note of discomfort, "How did he see it?" On his desk lay a small spiral someone had left behind, drawn in blue ink. It pulsed like something alive. Briggs picked it up, held it to the light. And for the first time in years, he felt small. The murmurs had barely settled when Rowan's 6 words spread through the hall like a sudden gust. "That number is wrong." Professor Briggs, still standing by the board, tightened his grip on the chalk. The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. The students whispered among themselves, eyes darting to the back row where the boy sat clutching his sketchbook. He didn't speak again. He never did. Sarah, sitting beside him, felt a pang of panic and pride. This was the first time Rowan had broken his silence in a room full of strangers, and it was with a statement that defied authority. "Who does he think he is?" a voice from the front muttered. Another student shrugged. "Maybe he's right?" But the professors weren't so quick to agree. Minutes later, Briggs resumed the lecture, his voice a notch cooler, but the proof was already fractured. In the faculty lounge, whispers turned to heated debates. Some dismissed Rowan as a disruptive child, others wondered if they had overlooked something fundamental. Word of the incident began to ripple beyond the lecture hall. A quiet custodial worker's son had spoken a truth that no one else had dared to voice. And in the quiet moments between lectures, Sarah watched Rowan, the boy who rarely spoke, sketching with feverish intensity, as if his mind raced miles ahead of the room around him. The next day, the story spread. Students speculated, professors exchanged cautious glances. Rowan's presence became a whispered secret, a rumor weaving through the corridors of Emerson Hall. Some called it an anomaly, an interruption that distracted from serious scholarship. Others began to question long-held assumptions about who belonged in the ivory tower. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages she never expected, some curious, some skeptical, a few quietly admiring. But she was wary. The world had not been kind to her or to Rowan. She knew better than to let hope rise too quickly. Meanwhile, Rowan remained distant, his focus tethered to his drawings. Patterns, spirals, fractals, the language he used to speak when words failed him. Professor Briggs, meanwhile, found himself revisiting the proof again and again. The error was subtle, nestled deep in the transition from discrete sums to continuous integrals. A minor slip, but one that could unravel conclusions built upon it. He spent late nights cross-checking equations, consulting with colleagues, and even reaching out to mathematicians in other departments. But something lingered in his mind. How had a boy, without formal training, without the vocabulary of scholars, seen what he had missed? At a faculty meeting, opinions divided sharply. "Dismiss this as a child's confusion," one senior professor insisted. "We cannot let sentiment override rigor." "But we must consider the possibility," argued a younger colleague. "If this is true, it changes the foundation of part of our work." The debate was more than academic. It touched on pride, tradition, and the unspoken hierarchies that governed their world. Sarah received an unexpected call from the department secretary, inviting her and Rowan to a private meeting with Professor Briggs. Her heart pounded. Was this an invitation or a warning? The day of the meeting, Sarah dressed Rowan carefully, smoothing his hair and tucking the scarf around his neck. They entered a small, book-lined office where Briggs waited. He greeted them with a measured nod. "Sarah, Rowan," he began, "I've reviewed the lecture again. Your son's observation was correct. There was an error." Sarah's breath caught. "Rowan has a rare gift," Briggs continued. "One we don't fully understand yet. I want to help nurture it." But the words felt heavy, burdened by caution and expectation. Rowan sat silently, watching, absorbing. He didn't say a word. Outside the office, Sarah whispered, "You did it, Rowan." He looked up, eyes bright, and for a moment the silence seemed less heavy. But the road ahead was uncertain. Word was already spreading. Some professors questioned Rowan's presence in the academic world. Others wanted to study him, to unlock his genius. Sarah worried, not for herself, but for her son. Would they see him as a child, a curiosity, or a true mathematician? Would Rowan's voice be heard or silenced again? That night, as Sarah tucked Rowan into bed, she saw him reach under his pillow and pull out a small notebook. He handed it to her, a new spiral pattern, intricate and alive. "Keep this safe," he said softly. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. This spiral was not just a drawing, it was hope, a code written in silence. In the quiet house, the weight of the day settled. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of change. This was just the beginning. The days after Rowan's declaration passed in a haze of whispered conversations and uneasy glances. Harvard's mathematics department was a fortress of tradition, pride, and prestige, not easily shaken by a child's quiet voice. Yet, that voice lingered, echoing in the minds of those who dared to listen. Sarah found herself navigating a strange new world, one that balanced hope and fear, recognition and rejection. Rowan's sketches became both his shield and his language. Though he rarely spoke, his drawings told stories no words could capture, spirals that folded infinitely, patterns that repeated with subtle variation, and curves that hinted at secrets beneath the surface of numbers. Inside the research labs, however, the atmosphere was tense. Professor Briggs sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers, chalkboards filled with equations and empty coffee cups. The error Rowan had spotted was subtle, A misplaced coefficient in a critical proof linking logarithmic functions to an alternating series. Small on paper, monumental in consequence. Briggs replayed the lecture in his mind the moment Rowan spoke those 6 words. He remembered the shock, the silence, and the uneasy acknowledgement. It was as if the boy had pierced the veil that separated genius from convention. Colleagues approached cautiously, some with skepticism, others with curiosity. Dr. Elena Rivera, a rising star in mathematical analysis, was among the latter. She volunteered to review the proof with Briggs, diving into the numbers with fresh eyes. Together they pored over calculations, seeking any hint that might justify the child's claim. Days turned into nights. The office lights burned late as they cross-checked integrals and sums, boundary conditions and limits. Finally, Rivera paused, her finger tracing a line of symbols. "Here," she whispered. "This coefficient, it's inconsistent. The step from discrete to continuous should be different." Briggs nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and regret washing over him. Meanwhile, Sarah juggled her life between work and Rowan's world of quiet observation. The department's invitation to meet had opened doors, but also revealed barriers. Not everyone welcomed Rowan's presence. Whispers of tokenism and distraction circulated in faculty lounges. Some questioned Sarah's place in this rarefied world. One afternoon, as Sarah and Rowan left the campus library, a sharp voice called out from behind. "Your son doesn't belong here," said a professor whose name Sarah had heard whispered in disdain. Sarah's heart clenched, but she held Rowan's hand tighter. "This is his world as much as anyone's," she replied quietly. Rowan, ever silent, squeezed her fingers in return. The days unfolded with a rhythm of their own. Rowan continued to sketch obsessively, his drawings growing more complex, an unfolding code, a map of something no one could yet name. The more he drew, the more the department realized they had only glimpsed the surface. Word spread beyond Harvard's walls. Mathematical circles buzzed with rumors of the boy who saw what professors missed. Some called it a miracle. Others, an anomaly to be studied or dismissed. At a private meeting convened by the department chair, a debate raged. Should Rowan be offered formal mentorship? Should his mother be granted access to resources? Or was this an unwanted complication in a world that valued pedigree and publication above all else? Briggs stood in the center, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He thought back to the moment Rowan spoke, the clarity of that simple phrase, and the brilliance behind those eyes. The boy was more than a voice in the back row. He was a challenge to the status quo, and Harvard would have to decide if it was ready to listen. The days following the departmental meeting were a whirlwind for Sarah and Rowan. The tension between excitement and apprehension wrapped tightly around them like a thick fog. Rowan, ever silent, seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, but remained withdrawn into his world of spirals and patterns. Sarah's phone rang incessantly. Calls from curious professors, cautious administrators, and even reporters. But she answered none. Her focus was singular: Rowan's well-being. One crisp morning, as autumn leaves painted Harvard Yard gold and crimson, Rowan pulled his worn sketchbook from his backpack and handed it to Sarah with a quiet insistence. The pages were filled with meticulous drawings, spirals that folded into themselves, interlacing loops, fractals that echoed the infinite. Amid these familiar patterns, a single page stood out. It was different. A schematic drawn with precision, interspersed with annotations in tiny, careful handwriting. A visual proof, perhaps. Sarah did not understand the mathematical symbols, but she felt the weight of it. That very day, Sarah received a letter from the department chair, inviting her and Rowan to submit a formal document outlining his findings. A paper. A proof. A chance for Rowan's work to be recognized. The request brought a fragile hope, but it also brought pressure. Pressure that neither Sarah nor Rowan fully understood. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Rowan spent hours with professors translating his drawings into formal language. His quiet presence contrasted with the lively discussions around him. Every correction, every suggestion, was met with silence or a faint nod. Yet the essence of his ideas remained intact, stubborn and brilliant. When the paper was finally submitted, it felt like a first breath after a long silence. But the academic world is unforgiving. The initial response was a mixture of intrigue and skepticism. Peer reviewers questioned the unconventional nature of the work. After all, the author was a 9-year-old with no formal training. Some praised the originality, others dismissed it as coincidence. Rowan's anonymity protected him in some ways, but rendered him invisible in others. The paper was published under a pseudonym, R.J. In the halls of Harvard, the ripples became waves. Discussions began about the nature of genius and the barriers imposed by traditional academia. Sarah watched Rowan withdraw further into himself. The spotlight was not a light. It was a harsh glare that cast long shadows. One afternoon, as Sarah waited outside a lecture hall, she saw Rowan sitting alone on a bench, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His sketchbook lay open on his lap, but the pages were blank. She approached quietly, sitting beside him. "Rowan," she said softly, "do you want to talk?" He looked up, eyes reflecting a storm of thoughts. "Too loud," he whispered. "Too many voices." Sarah nodded, understanding more than words could say. They sat in silence, the world bustling around them. In that quiet moment, Sarah realized that recognition was not the goal. Understanding was. And for Rowan, the journey had only just begun. Sarah's world had never been numbers and formulas. Her education ended long before the halls of Harvard beckoned her son. Yet every day, she walked those ancient corridors, a quiet guardian to a child whose mind danced in a language she barely understood. She often wondered how Rowan saw things. The spirals, the loops, the infinite patterns that flowed from his pen. Were they a secret code, a map to some hidden truth? Sarah was no mathematician, but she had learned to listen. She remembered the nights when Rowan would sit by the kitchen table, tracing patterns with his fingers, humming softly. She would watch, mesmerized by the way his eyes lit up, the intensity of his focus. Sometimes she tried to mimic his drawings, but the shapes escaped her. They twisted and turned in ways her mind could not grasp. Her world was grounded in the tangible, cleaning classrooms, preparing meals, soothing her son's anxieties. But Rowan's world was intangible, abstract, infinite. When the department began to recognize Rowan's talent, Sarah felt a swell of pride mingled with fear. Pride for her son's brilliance, fear for the walls that stood between them, and acceptance. One afternoon, sitting in the campus cafe, she overheard students discussing the paper R.J. had published. Some called it groundbreaking. Others doubted its validity because the author was a child with no credentials. Sarah wanted to shout, to defend Rowan, but words escaped her. Instead, she pulled out Rowan's sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with patterns that told stories only he could hear. She knew Rowan's gift was not just math. It was something deeper, a way of seeing, of being. When Rowan struggled with the formal language of proofs, Sarah was there, offering quiet encouragement. "You don't have to speak their language perfectly," she told him. "Just be true to what you see." That honesty became their anchor. Sarah also had to navigate the harsh realities of the academic world. Invitations to meetings came with fine print, expectations of mentorship programs, assessments of potential. Often, She felt like an outsider, her presence tolerated, but never welcomed. She remembered the sharp gaze of a professor who once said, "Your son's talent is exceptional, but can he thrive here?" The question haunted her. Could Rowan thrive in a world designed for those who spoke math fluently? Could a boy who spoke mostly through drawings and silence find his place among scholars? Sarah resolved to protect him, not from the world's skepticism, but from losing himself. She became his fiercest advocate, attending every meeting, asking questions, pushing for accommodations. Together they forged a path, one spiral at a time. At night, when the world was still, Sarah listened as Rowan traced new patterns on paper, the lines a language of hope. She held on to the belief that even without numbers, without formulas, a mother's love could be the strongest proof of all. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of anticipation. As Sarah unfolded the official letter with trembling hands, the Harvard Mathematics Department was extending an invitation, not just to Rowan, but to her as well. An invitation to return, to come back, not as a silent observer or a curious outsider, but as a welcomed participant in the world they had only just begun to glimpse. Sarah read the words again, the formality of the letter contrasting sharply with the warmth it promised. The department wished for Rowan to attend lectures, engage with professors, and continue exploring his gift under official mentorship. For Rowan, it meant something deeper. A chance to belong, to be seen not as the custodial worker's son, but as a young mind capable of reshaping mathematical thought. But the road to that moment was far from smooth. The weeks leading up to their return were filled with preparation and uncertainty. Rowan's routine shifted, his quiet days now peppered with meetings, assessments, and introductions to a world of scholars and students. Sarah watched her son closely. The spark in his eyes flickered with excitement, but also with the weight of expectation. On their first day back, the lecture hall was different. No longer a place to hide in the back row, Rowan was greeted by nods of recognition and cautious smiles. Professor Briggs approached, his expression softer now. "Welcome back, Rowan. We're glad to have you." The class was a delicate dance. Rowan listened intently, absorbing complex proofs and theories. When called upon, he hesitated, then responded with clarity that surprised even the most seasoned students. His sketchbook was never far, a constant companion as he translated abstract concepts into the visual language that made sense to him. Outside the lecture hall, Sarah encountered mixed reactions. Some faculty members were genuinely supportive, while others remained skeptical, their whispers tinged with doubt. But Sarah focused on the positive, the breakthroughs, the friendships forming around Rowan, the gradual dismantling of barriers. One afternoon, Rowan was invited to a seminar featuring visiting mathematicians from across the country. The topic: nonlinear dynamics and fractal geometry. As Rowan sat quietly, a guest professor noticed his sketchbook. Intrigued, she asked to see his drawings. What followed was a moment of revelation. The patterns Rowan created aligned remarkably with the seminar's concepts, offering fresh perspectives that even the experts found enlightening. Word of this encounter spread quickly. Sarah realized that Rowan's world was expanding, not just within Harvard, but into the broader mathematical community. Yet with every step forward came new challenges. The pressure to perform, to conform, to fit into rigid academic structures sometimes threatened to stifle Rowan's unique way of thinking. Sarah became more vigilant, ensuring her son's voice remained authentic and unfiltered. At night, as she tucked Rowan into bed, she reminded him, "You don't have to change who you are to be brilliant." Rowan would nod, his fingers tracing the edges of his latest spiral, a silent promise to keep moving forward on his own terms. As the last golden leaves of autumn fell across Harvard Yard, the mathematics department settled into the quieter rhythms of winter. The grand, ivy-covered buildings stood stoic beneath overcast skies, their ancient stones steeped in centuries of knowledge and tradition. Yet within these hallowed halls, a subtle shift was underway, one sparked by the quiet presence of a boy whose mind danced to its own unique cadence. Rowan had adapted to the routines of the department, navigating the world of equations and proofs with his own silent grace. His days were a delicate balance of listening intently during lectures, sketching intricate spirals in the margins of his notebooks, and retreating into moments of solitude where the language of patterns and curves became his voice. Though words escaped him, the clarity of his drawings spoke volumes. One evening, well past the time when most students had left, Rowan remained in the dimly lit seminar room. The soft glow of a single desk lamp illuminated his work. Sheets of paper covered in swirling fractals and looping spirals, a visual symphony of mathematical beauty. His pencil moved with practiced ease, tracing lines that seemed to extend into infinity. The silence was broken by a gentle creak of the door. Rowan looked up to see a tall figure entering, a man whose presence seemed to command the space without effort. Professor Julian Harlow, a visiting scholar from the Institute for Advanced Study, known among peers for his groundbreaking insights in topology and geometric analysis. Julian's eyes scanned the room, immediately drawn to the array of sketches before him. He approached quietly, the soft sound of his footsteps almost a whisper against the wooden floor. "What do we have here?" he asked, his voice low but rich with curiosity. Rowan's gaze met Julian's, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. The professor pulled up a chair, gesturing for the boy to share his work. Without hesitation, Rowan laid out the pages, fractals folding into themselves, spirals nesting endlessly, curves bending in patterns that defied simple explanation. For hours they pored over the drawings together. Julian's fingers traced the intricate loops, his eyes lighting up with recognition. To him, these sketches were not mere doodles, but a language, a map revealing profound mathematical truths that Rowan had begun to uncover intuitively. "This," Julian murmured, "is a rare and beautiful form of understanding. You're speaking in a language that few can grasp, let alone translate." Rowan listened, absorbing the weight of the professor's words. It was the first time someone had truly acknowledged the depth behind his silent expressions. But Julian's tone soon turned solemn. "There will be resistance," he warned. "The academic world clings tightly to tradition. A boy like you, untrained yet insightful, challenges more than just equations. You challenge the very fabric of how knowledge is defined and who is deemed worthy to contribute." Rowan's eyes reflected the storm of uncertainty that swirled within. In the days that followed, Julian became a quiet ally. He navigated the departmental politics with care, advocating for Rowan behind closed doors while respecting the boy's space. But the undercurrents of opposition were real. Some faculty members viewed Rowan's presence as a disruption, a threat to established hierarchies that had long dictated who could claim authority. Whispers filled hallways. Questions arose about the appropriateness of mentorship for someone so young, so different. Doubts lingered about the value of insights delivered outside conventional academic pathways. Sarah felt the tension mounting. She watched as Rowan retreated further into himself, his sketches growing ever more complex, yet tinged with a subtle restlessness. One afternoon, after a particularly taxing meeting, Sarah found Rowan sitting alone on a bench beneath a skeletal tree. The chill of winter brushed his cheeks, yet his fingers danced over his sketchbook, drawing shapes that seemed to pulse with life. She sat beside him, the silence between them comfortable yet heavy. Do you want to talk about it? She asked, gently. Rowan shook his head, eyes fixed on the swirling patterns. Sometimes, he whispered, the noise is too loud. The world wants me to be like them, but I am not. Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding the courage it took to hold on to oneself amidst the storm. Days passed, with moments of breakthrough and setback. Rowan began to share small pieces of his insights during seminars, cautiously bridging the gap between his visual language and the formal discourse of mathematics. Julian introduced him to collaborative projects, where Rowan's intuitive grasp offered fresh perspectives on long-standing problems. Slowly, walls began to crack. Yet the road was fraught with challenge. One evening, Rowan was invited to present his ideas to a small group of faculty and visiting scholars. His voice was soft, but his drawings spoke boldly. As he laid out the patterns, connections, and implications, the room grew silent, some in awe, others in disbelief. Afterwards, a senior professor approached, skepticism shadowing his eyes. Your work is fascinating, but unconventional. The question is whether it can withstand rigorous scrutiny. Rowan met his gaze steadily, a quiet resolve shining through. Every truth was once unconventional, Julian interjected, breaking the tension. And every revolution begins with a challenge to the norm. The gathering dispersed, leaving Rowan and Sarah to walk back through the snow-dusted campus. The air was cold, but a quiet warmth settled between them. In Rowan's world of spirals and silence, a new chapter was beginning. One where the unseen visitor had become a beacon guiding the way through uncertainty and towards a future shaped by courage, authenticity, and the unyielding quest for truth. Winter had settled over Harvard, blanketing the campus in a quiet hush, broken only by the crunch of footsteps on snow and the occasional gust of icy wind. Yet beneath this serene exterior, tensions simmered and grew, unseen but undeniable. A gathering storm, poised to challenge everything Rowan and his mother had fought to build. The mathematics department, once a place of possibility for Rowan's quiet genius, had become a battleground of ideologies, prejudices, and power struggles. Some professors rallied behind him, inspired by his unique perspective and potential to reshape mathematical understanding. Others, however, saw him as an anomaly, a disruption to the carefully maintained order of academia. Sarah could feel the undercurrents whenever she walked the halls. Whispers followed her and Rowan. Sideways glances met them in meetings. Invitations arrived with strings attached. Expectations of compliance, conformity, and silence about the true nature of Rowan's gift. One evening, after a particularly fraught departmental meeting, Sarah and Rowan found themselves alone in their modest apartment. The weight of the day pressed heavily against the walls. Rowan sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by sheets of paper covered in spirals and fractals, the patterns growing more intricate with each passing day. His pencil danced across the page, but the lines seemed tinged with an unfamiliar urgency, a restless energy that spoke of deeper turmoil. Sarah watched him, her heart aching with both pride and fear. "Are you all right, Rowan?" she asked softly. He looked up, eyes shimmering with unshed emotion. "Too many voices," he whispered. "They want me to be quiet." Sarah reached out, her hand covering his. "You don't have to be, not with me." The next morning brought an unexpected summons. Professor Briggs requested a private meeting with Sarah and Rowan. The trio gathered in a small, book-lined office, the walls heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Briggs's expression was grave. "There are concerns," he began carefully. "Some faculty members question whether Rowan's presence is appropriate for this environment." Sarah's grip tightened on Rowan's hand. "You mean they want to send him away?" Briggs hesitated. The concerns are about academic rigor and the standards we uphold, but I believe Rowan has a place here, if we can navigate the challenges together. The conversation revealed the underbelly of academic politics, a world where reputation, tradition, and gatekeeping often overshadowed innovation and inclusion. Sarah knew then that the storm was not just external. It threatened to infiltrate Rowan's sense of self, his passion, and his hope. Determined to protect her son, Sarah sought allies beyond the department. She reached out to disability advocates, educational reformers, and mathematicians who championed diverse ways of thinking. Together, they began crafting a support network, one that would shield Rowan from prejudice and nurture his gift. Meanwhile, Rowan continued to push boundaries. He collaborated with Professor Julian Harlow on a project exploring fractal dimensions in quantum topology, translating his intuitive drawings into formal models. Their work garnered attention, sparking both admiration and envy. Amid these successes, Rowan faced moments of isolation. Social events and informal gatherings were often uncomfortable, his quiet demeanor and unconventional communication setting him apart. One snowy evening, as Sarah and Rowan walked through Harvard Yard, a group of students passed by, whispering and casting furtive glances. Rowan paused, clutching his sketchbook tightly. Sarah knelt beside him. "Remember, Rowan, your worth isn't defined by their whispers." He nodded, eyes resolute. The gathering storm raged on, but within its fury lay a quiet promise that Rowan's light, though tested, would not be extinguished. The long grip of winter was finally loosening its hold on Harvard Yard. Pale sunlight filtered through the ancient branches, awakening the campus from its seasonal slumber. Buds appeared on trees, their delicate green a hopeful contrast to the lingering chill in the air. For Rowan and Sarah, this changing season felt like a reflection of their own journey. Tentative, yet filled with possibility. In the mathematics department, Rowan's quiet presence had become something almost tangible, a subtle force that could not be ignored. No longer was he the silent boy sitting in the back row. His insights, drawn from a mind that spoke more fluently through spirals and patterns than words, had begun to reshape conversations. The day began like any other, with Rowan seated near the back of a packed seminar room. The topic was advanced and dense: fractal geometry's implications in quantum topology, a subject that seemed to swirl at the edges of comprehension for even the most seasoned mathematicians. But Rowan's eyes were sharp, his mind humming as he absorbed every complex formula and every nuanced argument. As the seminar progressed, the room was alive with debate and discovery. When the floor was opened for questions, Rowan hesitated, his small hand slowly rising amid a sea of confident gestures. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the boy whose presence had become a quiet enigma. With a voice steady despite the weight of expectation, Rowan spoke. Using his sketchbook, he illustrated a series of spirals and fractal curves, weaving his unique perspective into a challenge of the foundational assumptions of the prevailing theory. His explanation was concise but profound, exposing a gap that invited reconsideration of the accepted framework. The room was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that precedes a paradigm shift. Faces reflected a spectrum of emotions: surprise, skepticism, intrigue. Some professors exchanged furtive glances, questioning whether this insight could come from a child, while others leaned in, captivated by the clarity and originality of Rowan's perspective. Professor Julian Harlow, who had watched Rowan's journey closely, stood to support him. "Indeed," Julian said, "the patterns Rowan highlights align with recent computational models. It's a reminder that intuition and formalism together can unlock new horizons." A ripple of approval passed through the audience, and the mood shifted from cautious skepticism to curiosity and respect. Sarah, standing quietly near the door, felt a swell of pride so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Her son, who once barely spoke, was now breaking down walls, challenging norms, and opening minds. In the days that followed, Rowan's contributions sparked a flurry of activity. Research groups formed to delve deeper into the questions he raised. Collaborative papers were drafted with Rowan's drawings serving as vital references. Invitations to conferences and workshops arrived, seeking the voice behind the spirals. Yet through all this attention, Rowan remained himself, humble, introspective, and reserved. His sketches continued to fill pages, evolving in complexity and beauty, each line a step in his silent narrative of discovery. One evening, Sarah found Rowan at the kitchen table, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. His pencil moved rhythmically, tracing spirals that seemed to pulse with life. She sat beside him, her voice gentle. "What do you see in those spirals, Rowan?" He looked up, eyes reflecting the depths of his thoughts. "A world where everything connects," he whispered, "where silence speaks louder than words." Sarah smiled, understanding that her son's journey was far from over. The academic world was vast and complex, filled with challenges and opportunities. But Rowan's mind was a beacon, quiet, steady, and unyielding. The season outside was changing, and so was their story. Each new day brought a chance to reshape not just equations, but the very definition of genius, voice, and belonging. Spring blossomed fully over Harvard, painting the campus in vibrant greens and bursts of color. The ancient brick buildings stood resilient under the warm sunlight, shadows retreating as the world breathed anew. For Rowan and Sarah, the season marked not just a change in weather, but a transformation, a dawning of hope, acceptance, and new beginnings. The mathematics department had come a long way since the day Rowan first spoke those 6 words that echoed like thunder. That number is wrong. His journey from silent observer to recognized contributor had been marked by triumphs and trials, courage and compassion. In a quiet corner of Emerson Hall, a small room had been prepared, a sanctuary of sorts, named simply Room E, in honor of Rowan's pseudonymous signature. The room was designed as a space where children and young minds could explore mathematics beyond rigid formulas, embracing intuition, creativity, and the joy of discovery. Rowan entered the room, his sketchbook tucked carefully under his arm. The walls were adorned with colorful fractal murals, spirals expanding and contracting in mesmerizing patterns. Tables were scattered with puzzles, models, and drawing materials, a playground for imagination. Sarah followed close behind, her heart swelling with pride and a hint of relief. This room was more than a space, it was a statement, a declaration that genius could be found in silence, in difference, and in the spaces between words. Rowan sat at a table by the window, sunlight warming his face. He opened his sketchbook, fingers tracing a new pattern, an intricate spiral that seemed to breathe with life. He began to draw, the lines flowing freely, unbound by expectation or judgment. As he worked, Sarah watched the transformation in her son. The weight of years of silence, misunderstanding, and struggle seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet joy that radiated from within. Professor Briggs entered the room quietly, his eyes misty. "Rowan," he said softly, "this room is for you, and those who follow your path. May it be a beacon for all who seek to understand that math is not just numbers, but a language of the soul. The room filled slowly as children from diverse backgrounds arrived, some shy, some curious, all eager to explore. Rowan became a guide, his drawings sparking wonder and conversation. In this space, barriers dissolved, differences were celebrated. The language of math was spoken in colors, curves, and spirals, accessible to all who dared to see beyond the surface. That evening, as Sarah tucked Rowan into bed, she whispered, "You've changed so much, my boy." Rowan smiled, eyes shining with quiet wisdom. "And I have only begun," he said. Outside, the stars shone brightly, the universe vast and full of mysteries yet to be discovered. The journey was far from over. But in the room of light, a new chapter had begun, one where silence spoke volumes and every spiral told a story of hope, courage, and endless possibility. Life is full of miracles that often come from the most unexpected places. Rowan, the silent boy with eyes that speak volumes, has taught us a precious lesson. True talent can never be confined within rigid boundaries, and the most profound voices may come from those we least expect. In a world dominated by precision and reason, Rowan used spirals and repeating patterns, guided by intuition, to unlock a new language, one of connection, unspoken understanding, and relentless perseverance. He showed us that sometimes, to see the truth, we must listen with our hearts, not just our minds. Rowan's journey is not only the story of a young genius overcoming prejudice, but also a reminder of the power of maternal love, patience, and unwavering faith in the darkest of times. Each of us can be a Rowan in our own way, someone who sees what others overlook, who dares to speak when others stay silent, and who changes the world through authenticity and belief in oneself. Let this story be a source of inspiration to never lose hope, to relentlessly pursue your dreams, and to always believe that, no matter how vast and complex the world may seem, there is always room for honest voices and courageous hearts. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey. Your time, attention, and open heart mean the world. May Rowan's story inspire you to embrace your unique gifts and to courageously light the path forward, no matter the obstacles. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep believing.